As the war drags on, peace talks have turned into a diplomatic battleground. Ukraine and Europe are pushing back against a US proposal that recognizes Russia's control over Crimea. In response, Europe has put forward a contrasting plan focused on securing a full ceasefire first, with territorial negotiations to follow. Europe's proposal opposes recognizing any Russian control over Ukrainian land, including Crimea. The rift between the two sides, which became evident during recent meetings in Paris and London, raises pressing questions about how and on whose terms this war should end. This will be our discussion today in depth. Stay tuned. Europe proposed a new set of terms to counter a US proposal which had been described as the final offer for a deal. As reported by the Washington Post, European leaders are straining to maintain a delicate diplomatic balance as attempts to reach a peace deal in Ukraine near a critical juncture, as they try to edge the Ukrainian president closer to accepting some of the controversial terms being pushed by US President Donald Trump. For instance, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has pushed back on Trump's proposal and refused to endorse any formal recognition of Crimea as Russian. Europe's proposal added many different elements, including a full ceasefire to start and robust security guarantees, especially from the US. According to the Kiev Independent, the peace proposal given to the US by Ukrainian and European officials earlier this week include robust security guarantees, including from Washington, and no talks on territorial concessions until a full and unconditional ceasefire in the sky, on land and at sea has been implemented. The proposal also demands that sanctions on Russia only be eased after a sustainable peace has been achieved, a move the White House is reportedly considering implementing even before a peace deal has been agreed on. Washington's allies have been voicing growing alarm over the Trump administration's proposed framework to end the war, which would allow Russia to retain seized Ukrainian territory. During the high-level meetings held in London on April 23rd, US, European and Ukrainian officials made progress in narrowing differences, the newspaper added. Well, for more analysis, we're joined from Washington by Mr. Tom Davis, former Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and from London by Mr. Qaid Omar, the political analyst. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen, and welcome to In Depth. Let me here start with Mr. Tom. And the U.S. proposal reportedly includes potential recognition of Crimea as Russian and early sanctions relief. In your point of view, how do you see, what do you have on these terms? At the same time, Ukraine and Europe see them as major concessions.
Well, Russia de facto controls Crimea at this point. They marched into that and they got no resistance from either the EU or the United States when they went in. They de facto hold that area. And I think part of any agreement at this point just has to recognize what is on the ground. Doesn't mean anybody is happy with what happened there. But if you want a peace, I think you have to give certain recognitions at this point. I think this is what Americans have put forward. Now, I want to note that President Zelensky and President Trump met yesterday. Seems to me that what Ukraine needs most is security guarantees, which they thought they had in the 1980s when they gave up nuclear weapons for guarantees under President Yeltsin, which later President Putin reneged on. So I think security is what they need to stop this fighting, which is eating up billions of dollars and thousands of people.
So you're just saying here that you want the deal goes on and that all parties agree or accept the situation on the ground or the de facto status of matters, right?
Certainly, as far as Crimea is concerned, Crimea is kind of separate because they walked in without really any resistance from the United States or from the EU at this point. And I just think part of any deal, at least as envisioned from President Trump, would include a recognition that Crimea, they leave, Russia stays in Crimea.
Right,
the rest of it is under negotiation.
Right. Mr. Qaid, by offering a totally different approach, how does Europe view the Trump administration's willingness to allow Russia to retain Ukrainian territory as part of a peace deal?
I mean, good afternoon to you and to your guest and to the audience. I would say that it's really difficult for Ukraine to accept losing territory either in Crimea or in the Donbas area in the south of Ukraine. So I think it's becoming complicated because Zelensky is probably thinking about his political future, and if he make that concession now, it's likely that he will lose power and he will fall in the eyes of the Ukrainian people who sees him as a hero at the moment, and he doesn't want to become a traitor, the person or the leader who lost Ukrainian territory when he was in power. Europeans also have fear that if Russia gets what they wanted and if Russia emerge as the winner in this war, that the security of Europe will be at risk and there will be a threat from Russia towards other European states, and basically they would rather if Ukraine comes out of this peace deal as a winner, but a state that's retained its territory, it got security guarantees. There are NATO soldiers in the Ukrainian soil. Russia will not be able to attack Ukraine again. Ukraine will join the EU and possibly NATO. But I think, some of these desires by the Europeans is almost science fiction, or it's a dream. It's not going to come true, sadly.
The issue is that, as Mr. Tom respectively here said, that the status quo on the ground is that Russia or Russian troops are in Crimea. They are, or they do exist there. They are putting their hands on this area. We'll get back to you, Mr. Qaid. Let me go to Mr. Tom. Ukraine and Europe leaders argue that the sequencing of peace matters. Why does the U.S. prioritize territorial negotiations early on rather than starting with a ceasefire?
Well, I think a ceasefire has to be the end result of this. Plus, I think Ukraine is going to need guarantees on the ground, both from Russia, who's broken their word before, and support from Europe and the United States should that be should there be any problems. So I think number one is to stop the fighting, stop the killing, stop the utilization of resources that could be better spent other places, and a recognition that particularly in Crimea, Russia's been there now for several years. Nobody likes the way they took it, and they walked in and took it, but there was really no resistance. If you want peace, I say if you want peace and a settlement, I think you have to recognize that. In terms of the Donbass and these other areas, I think there is some negotiation there, but what's the realistic alternative? Continue to spend billions, if not trillions of dollars, thousands of lives where not much progress is being made, and in a war of attrition, it's very difficult for Ukraine to win that area back. So we're recognizing what's on the ground. What Ukraine needs is guarantees in the future. Russia's not going to do this again, and that's going to take international cooperation and assurances.
But then, why don't they start with a ceasefire, sir, and then negotiate the lands in the hands of Russia?
Well, I think they'd like to do that. I think that would be the ideal way that you do this. I'm not sure all the parties agree at this point, particularly Russia.
Right. Mr. Qaid, with the U.S. threatening to pull back from its mediation role, can Europe step up to broker a peace deal that satisfies both Ukraine's sovereignty and Russian demands?
I think this is an opportunity, and with the president of the U.S., Donald Trump, he wants to reach a peace deal. He wants a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and it was a brave move and a good step from the U.S. to come into the negotiation table and to start talking to Russia, and which is something groundbreaking. And I would say that the European will find it very difficult to be a peace negotiators or deal breakers, because they are already biased. They are already on the side of Ukraine, and they are supplying weapons to Ukraine, and they want to put soldiers in the Ukrainian soil. They are supplying Ukraine with F-16s fighters, and they are supplying Ukraine with rockets and everything else. So they are fueling the war rather than supporting a ceasefire. So how can the Europeans become more of like deal breakers or sort of like negotiators or people that can help with reaching peace? I mean, obviously, that's what it's hoped. And Russia is saying that they are open to talk to European leaders, and they do want to. But obviously, Europe is putting sanctions on Russia, and they are squeezing and putting pressure on Russia. So at the same time, whether they will be accepted as peace negotiators by the Russians, I think that's what the issue is, and it's going to be really hard and difficult unless things change on the ground.
But here, Mr. Qaid,
we do need one.
Here, Mr. Qaid, we have to understand that the U.S. also supported Ukraine, particularly at the at times of the previous administration, and supported them vehemently. Now, Europe is doing that because it is a threat, or this is what Europe thinks. So it is supporting Ukraine for its own interests. Now, why can't it at this point negotiate or be a mediator at the end of the day?
I think because of that position, it's becoming a transactional relationship. It's becoming about mutual interests. What Russia is going to get out of this peace deal, what Europe is going to get out of it, what Ukraine is going to get out of it. And it's like a piece of cake. They're trying to divide the pieces between them. And sadly, in this situation, there's going to be a power relationship, and whoever is dominating and has got the power and the upper hand is going to dictate the terms of peace. And basically, as Donald Trump said himself, that Ukraine is fighting with a country 20 times its size, and it's hoping to win the war. It's not possible for Ukraine to win the war, even with all of the European powers and all of the European weapons and the American weapons. They still haven't been able to win any piece of the war. So basically, in this kind of situation and in this kind of power relationship and negotiations, they're gonna have to make concessions. I think only when both sides make concessions, we are going to be able to reach peace and reach ceasefire.
Mr. Tom, from your own perspective, how can the Trump administration's proposed terms be reconciled with European leaders' demands for a full ceasefire and security guarantees?
I just think you have to take a look at what's on the ground at this point. As our speaker from the UK said, what's going to change the situation on the ground? What hope does the Ukraine have of taking this land back from Russia, which is much stronger? Nobody's won this war. This has caused tremendous problems in Russia. But Russia is now in a wartime economy. That's almost their model at this point. I think it behooves everybody. And Russia also has more European countries have now joined NATO up against something that they did not want to happen. So Russia has been weakened by this, even as they have picked up some land in Ukraine. But it's a recognition of the reality of what is on the ground, what is likely to happen as you look ahead and spend trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. It's not going to change that much, at least in Ukraine's favor. And so it behooves everybody to try to stop that and cut a deal and cut your losses at this point. And I recognize that no one likes to give up land where somebody has come in and just invaded it. But you've got to recognize the realities of the ground. I mean, you have to look ahead and see what are these costs going to be to the Ukraine and possibly to Europe. And one way around this is to make sure that Ukraine is strengthened so that this can never happen again in Ukraine. And you have international commitments to make sure that there will be no more advances onto Ukraine soil.
But here, if I may ask you, this conflict persists. But if it persists, do you think Europe could be ready to take on more responsibility if definitely the US withdraws from this peace negotiations?
But even if they do, I would just argue, my friend from the UK, even if they do, how is it likely to change the result, given the tremendous resources that Russia has put into this?
Let me get Mr. Qaid's here point of view of the same question. As this conflict could persist,
I think what we need to think of,
be ready to take on more responsibility?
What we need to think of that the economy all over the world is shaking at the moment. We have seen a rise in the cost of living. We have seen the tariffs that the US imposed on Europe, on international states, and the impact of that on economy, the global trading, and basically the world cannot take any other economical crisis again. The war is costing Europe and costing the world so much money, and that drain of resources, drain of money needs to stop. Basically, the people of Europe are gonna uprise, and they're going to start making their governments change their policies toward Ukraine. People are fed up of the cost of living going up all the time, and they have no more money. So basically, this war is pointless because, as my colleague in the US said, Ukraine is not going to win the war, and the sanctions on Russia are continuing. Russia is impacting on Russia's economy. The counter sanction from Russia, and you've got China, Iran, other countries getting involved as well. And the world needs a break.
Indeed.
We need to have some respite.
Indeed. The world's economy at large is reeling from this war that has extended now for this is the third year. But here we're speaking about negotiations in terms of security guarantees for Europe. So this is why we're asking if Europe could assume the responsibility of discussing such a matter directly with Russia so as to take its guarantees and reach a consensus or reach a ceasefire that finds consensus from both the Ukrainian side and Russian.
Yes, Europe will take responsibility, and they've already pledged that they're going to help Ukraine and they're going to give them weapons and they're going to give them money. But for how long they're going to be doing this for no outcome? It's
So
basically
this is
you are
why
investing in a losing business. So it's brainless and it's pointless and it's crazy, to be honest with you. I just think reaching peace and coming to a settlement, ceasefire is the best way forward. That will save lives of Ukrainians, lives of Russians, lives everywhere, and basically it will also save our money.
Mr. Tom, with the US and Europe at odds over the terms or over some terms, can a unified approach, and I mean here a unified approach from Europe and the United States, still emerge to end this war in Ukraine, and what it would take for a unified approach?
Well, I think you'll eventually get there. You have to, I think you start at different positions, but it is in everybody's interest to get this resolved, get a ceasefire, get this settled as quickly as possible, and give Ukraine the kind of security guarantees they're going to need to come out of this with something. So I think the United States stands ready to help in that. I think lifting of the sanctions is what Russia badly needs at this point, as well as what they're bleeding over there right now. But as you look at this from 30,000 feet, you say, why can't these folks settle it? As our speaker said from the UK, though, there are internal politics in the Ukraine. It's still a semi-democracy, that have to be resolved, that make Zelensky's position a little harder. But Europe and the United States, I think it's in their interest as well to get this stop and get security guarantees for the Ukraine over the long term. And I think that's where we're headed.
But what can find common ground between the demands or what the US terms is putting and the European plan that has been submitted? What could be what could find consensus for both of them to go with a unified approach towards the matter? What
well,
common
that's
ground?
going to be that's going to be up to the parties when you look at it. But the reality is, as we said, the ground is not changing much at this point, and it's difficult to give up ground where you've been invaded and things taken, and you've lost ground. But as you look ahead at the status quo, that's just unacceptable because we're bleeding billions of dollars. Ukraine and Russia are both losing economically, and they're losing militarily. I think Russia made a huge miscalculation going in there. I think Ukraine has got the world behind them in terms of what they showed in their resistance to Russia. But you've got to look ahead, and where do we go from here? And I think Europe and the United States come together, and I think the hardest part is making sure that this doesn't happen again, that we have some kind of international force and guarantees in there on those boundaries to make sure that Russia can't do this again. They promised once before to guarantee Ukraine under Yeltsin, and Putin came in and disregarded that. So I think the Ukraine is really looking for security guarantees that if they can't get it by joining NATO, they're going to need it by separate treaties. And I think the US and Europe are going to have to be part of that.
Mr. Qaid, given the complexities of issues like the territorial one, the sanctions, the security, what would it take to get both Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table with guarantees, with genuine intent really to settle?
So as my colleague was saying, Ukraine wants guarantees because obviously Russia promised not to do it again, and now they've done it. And Russia's saying that the US and Europe promised that NATO will not extend to the east before, and now they want to extend it to the east. They've already extended it. It's now in Finland, and it's in Sweden, and basically that's on the borders with Russia. And Ukraine wants also to join the NATO. And basically, I think it should be guarantees for both sides, guarantees for Ukraine and guarantees for Russia. Russia's saying if NATO states soldiers are in Ukraine, that is NATO. And if NATO is in Ukraine, that will not happen. That will be a third world war. So basically, the solution is to give guarantees to Ukraine and give guarantees to Russia. So basically, it's making concessions from both sides. Ukraine will not join the NATO. They can join the EU economically. They can join the EU. That is something that they are free to do. That's from Russia's point of view. But they cannot join the NATO. NATO states soldiers cannot be on Ukrainian soil. What I would say, it's United Nations soldiers should come to Ukraine.
Yes, clear.
For example, soldiers from South Africa or from Brazil or from Asia.
It's very clear. It's very clear. Very clear what you're saying here, but remains to be seen. That was Mr. Qaid Omar, the political analyst, and Mr. Tom Davis, former Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives. We thank you both, gentlemen, for being with us and for your insights here. And that concludes this episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.